Thanks for tuning in to the WingSpace Podcast. This podcast is not a replacement for mental health treatment or professional health care. In case of crisis or emergency, please contact your local healthcare provider or dial 911.
Hey there, and welcome to the WingSpace Podcast, a place to take up space. In season 5 of the podcast, we're focusing on our 5 pillars of wellness: food, movement, sleep, stress, and relationships. And today I am happy to welcome back our certified nutrition specialist, our expert in all things food and nutrition, Tracy Pritchard. It's so good to have you here, Tracy.
Hey, good to be back.
And so we're going to be focusing on the first pillar, that food/nutrition pillar today. What the listeners will have heard me say in a previous episode in this series is that these 5 pillars don't stand alone, and that they are kind of equally balanced in terms of holding up the foundation of our life and our wellness. And so we're going to talk about food and nutrition today, but there's going to be some overlap with movement and sleep and stress and relationships because it's all intertwined. And the other thing that is really important to remember, we're going to bring you during the course of these 5 or so episodes that I'm going to be presenting in this initial part of the season 5, the basics, bringing you back to the basics. We're not trying to make it complicated. The hard part is that if you have a smartphone, then you have an algorithm that is listening to you. Everything you search, everything you talk about, you are getting ads that are popping up everywhere. And it's all contradictory. It's all contradictory. It's eat more meat, eat less meat, don't eat dairy, work out, don't work out, walk, you should run. Like, it's all contradictory. So a word of caution that the information that's out there is more complicated than it needs to be. And so our hope for you today is that you'll just hear the basics, a few nuggets, some good quality knowledge that you can implement for sustainability in your life. You think that's a fair enough introduction, Tracy?
Absolutely.
So you and I have talked a lot about this, and we could have many, many conversations. We could do an entire whole podcast season on nutrition because there's so much to it. But if someone says to you, where do I start? What's the answer to that? Where do people start?
Well, that is a really good question. And a lot of times I'm like, well, what are you currently doing? And I ask them, what do you think's working for you? Where do you think you could improve? And oftentimes it's someone will say, well, I skip breakfast and I don't have a lot of energy. Or my family, we do dinners, but aside from dinners, I never prepare breakfast or lunch, or I'm always eating in the car and on the go. So really, there's a lot of coaching as well. I mean, I know a lot. I know all the science and background biochemistry things, but it's really about like, where are people at and what are they willing to change now within their lifestyle? So if you have a busy working mom who feels responsible for planning, shopping, and preparing all the meals and snacks, it might be overwhelming. It would be to overhaul everything at once. So we might start really simple and be like, hey, can you buy more frozen vegetables and add those to your dinners, or more whole fruits that you can pack for snacks instead of relying on a vending machine? I mean, that's where we're talking about those simple foundational things.
And if you listeners are not following us on Instagram, the Wellness Wing at H&H is our handle for Instagram. And one of the things that Tracy and I are committed to doing is sharing easy, sustainable steps. And so we have this ongoing text thread that Tracy is sending me the most simple ideas that you're going to begin to see. You have already seen some because I've posted a little bit getting into this month of January. This podcast is coming out in February, so there's more coming. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be, fresh organic vegetables from the garden, from the farmer down the road. It can be frozen veggies from Food Lion, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be hard. And sometimes we make it so complicated that we just throw in the towel and we give up.
I'll even throw in there for the listeners who are like, okay, Yeah, I'm even too overwhelmed to think about that because we're eating in our car or on the road. Yeah, ideally we'd have family meals. We talk about the benefits of those, but I get it. Jen and I both have athletes and, spouses and things and busy schedules. But if you're eating out a lot, perhaps start there and get the nutritional information for the menus. Maybe it's swapping where you go to eat out. If you're eating a lot of fried food, maybe you switch to somewhere where you can get it grilled or healthier options. I mean, even walking through Chipotle or Meza. There's places where you can actually build a healthy meal and not just have to settle for the traditional fast food that might be fried, French fries, that type of thing.
So maybe you can start there with a little bit of a description for people. You said you could build a healthy meal. So what does that even look like for someone that has no idea? I'm thinking of my husband who, he's like a meat and potatoes kind of guy, right? Like getting those greens on the plate. We've had a big evolution because he's the meat and potatoes. So everyone's been raised differently. Everyone has different resources available to them. What is a healthy plate?
So I'll take a minute to explain that. And before I do, I'd also like to say, when we talk about a healthy meal, I know there's a lot of people out there that are like, oh, look, I've got this pre-made boxed protein drink. There's a lot of great ones out there, but those should not be confused with a balanced meal. And too often, the meal that we might be getting close to balancing is dinner, but we completely forget about balancing a breakfast and lunch. We're either just assembling some snacks, which can work if you learn how to balance, but we're just forgetting about those and kind of putting all the pressure on the dinner meal. But there are, the whole 3 square meals a day with or without some snacks needs to be considered. So to answer your question, what would a healthy meal be? That would be a balanced meal. So typically that is going to have protein, some complex carbohydrates, non-starchy vegetables, and some healthy fats. So, for example, a protein for meat eaters could be beef, chicken. For our pescatarians, it could be some fish. Our vegetarians might have some beans or lentils as their protein. So, do we have some protein there? Ideally, probably around 4 to 6 ounces is going to be what most people fall into, give or take. So then, some leafy greens or non-starchy vegetables. That's like your stir-fry vegetables, peppers, onions, broccoli, that type of thing. That's also the same vegetables that you find in a lot of soups or stews. It's the same vegetables that can be on a veggie tray. I know that some people are like, oh, I can't eat cooked vegetables. They make me gag, but I'm fine eating raw vegetables. Great. Put them in a baggie. You can add them to that meal. But, really, if we can get a serving or 2 of leafy greens or non-starchy vegetables in with that protein I mentioned, that would be great. If you're eating something like a sandwich, okay, you're like, well, how do I do that? Well, add some lettuce, tomato, onions. You just got your veggies in. That wasn't hard. And then the complex carbohydrate is a lot of times where people are missing out because, we've got a carb phobia going on. And unfortunately, a lot of times there's an all or nothing attitude. But those complex carbohydrates are going to be things like beans and lentils, which again are also a protein, but they offer fiber and carbohydrates. It could be some whole grains, like think brown rice, quinoa, a bread with, good quality bread. It can also be those starchy vegetables like sweet potatoes or butternut squash. Those are complex carbohydrates, or even fruit. So if you're like, well, I have a sandwich and got some veggies on my sandwich, add a piece of fruit. That's a complex carbohydrate. And then the healthy fat is really what keeps us satiated. That's going to be something like avocado, olive oil, even some nuts or seeds could be that. So there is unlimited combinations of how you can make that work. And my goal with our clients is to say, just start observing. If you're like, oh yeah, I eat a chicken salad every day with leafy greens and grilled chicken, but an hour later I'm ready to, eat my hand, you probably need to add some type of complex carbohydrate to make it a balanced meal so that you're not starving later. On the contrary, if you're someone like you said, your husband, who's like, hey, I've got my meat and potatoes, so he's got a protein, he's got a complex carbohydrate, would he be willing to add a side salad or some type of steamed vegetable to that meal? And that would round it out.
As you were talking, I was thinking too, I've heard a lot of people talk about food. Obviously, it's something that's out there. It's a part of all of our conversations, it seems like. But, sometimes it's, if it doesn't go together, right? Like if it doesn't all fit on the plate together, it doesn't fit together. And I guess I would invite people to consider throwing that idea out the window. One of the things I'm trying is to add vegetables to every meal, just to every meal. So, it's hard in the morning. If I'm going to scramble some eggs, I can throw some spinach in there. Great. But if I don't have time for eggs, then what am I going to do? I had some carrots in a bag and I ate some carrots, right? Did it go with my protein shake I had? Not really. But we maybe sometimes have to take ourselves, play a little mental game, right? And take the idea that it goes together away, and we're going to have this protein shake, we're going to have this vegetable, right? Maybe the plate doesn't all jive and is cohesive, but we can eat it in parts too. I mean, as long as we're getting in all of the important pieces, it doesn't have to be a gourmet meal.
I totally agree. And that makes me think too that knowing your mornings might be busy, even just having hard-boiled eggs on hand, maybe you would have felt that it would go with that. And it's still the same idea. But what I like about what you're doing is it keeps us in that mindset of, does this meal have the different components? And a lot of times getting those vegetables and the balanced meal in the morning prevents that overeating late at night. A lot of people at night are like, oh my gosh, that's when I'm craving all the things. It's nothing that they did at or after dinner. It's how they set their whole day up. So that's what's really important.
What I'm hearing you say without actually saying the word is plan. I'm hearing this idea that we have to plan and prepare. You mentioned the hard-boiled egg after I had mentioned the carrots, and I immediately thought of like a bento box or like a protein pack, and maybe you have the divided Tupperware things. Maybe you just have some baggies. Maybe you have whatever you have, but you begin to throw those pieces together, and you have a little, easy to go breakfast or lunch or whatever. So I'm hearing how important it is to plan.
Absolutely. And, again, breakfast people don't pay attention to planning for it, but there are things that you can make on the weekend or in the evening if you're shot out of a cannon in the morning. I know that's how most people live. It's like everything's a rush. There's things like chia puddings. You can make shakes the night before if you're going to make them from scratch and add all the goodies. Some people like the overnight oats where you can put some protein or nut butters in. And then always have plan B, because let's face it, you might go to do that and you drop your mason jar and it breaks, or, your kid used the last of your almond milk. So if you're like, wow, plan B, or maybe your Friday plan or Monday morning plan is to go through a Starbucks drive-through or somewhere else, know what they have there, because they do have choices like with the eggs or with fruit that are balanced and are decent and need to be good enough. Too often everyone's like all or nothing, like I'm starting Monday or I'm starting next month. Like, what can you do today or tomorrow? I would argue, and you can do decent at the Wawa if you need to. You'll pay a little more for the cut vegetables and fruits and the lean proteins, but it's there. It's in the little carousel right in the middle, refrigerated and ready to go.
It's been so interesting as a person who has celiac and is limited by what I can eat that, I'm constantly hearing, even after all of these years of having this disease, my family will say, well, where can you eat, Mom? We want to go someplace that you can eat. And I can pretty much eat anywhere. There's a couple of fast food places that are a little bit difficult just because they don't have salad options. But, you said Wawa. I can easily make a healthy, gluten-free meal. Not that everyone needs to eat gluten-free, but if I'm thinking, if you're thinking gluten-free, there's no bread, potentially, there's nothing fried. So I'm going for the refrigerator case. I'm going for the hard-boiled eggs. I'm going for the fruit cup. I'm going for the pre-cut vegetables. We could all make that choice instead of getting, the foot-long sub with all the extra stuff. Or I'm in Charlotte Hall now, so we have the wonderful Royal Farms and the fried chicken and all that stuff. And all those things are wonderful, right? We just can't do them every single day for all of our meals, or we're going to be feeling it.
It's interesting you talk about fried chicken, because I have a friend who told me, like, Tracy, I just love fried chicken. And I was like, okay. And I said, what do you have with the fried chicken? And she said she feels like she has to have all the traditional sides with the fried chicken, but never considered that she could eat her one piece of fried chicken, but have it with a salad and steamed green beans or roasted potatoes. But it doesn't have to be French fries and like the mayonnaise heavy coleslaws and all that other stuff. So it was like, okay, well, have your one piece of fried chicken. Instead of taking that away, what can you add to it that makes it even better? For example, if you're at a party and you're like, hey, I'm going for that fried chicken, well, maybe that day, instead of a traditional dessert, go for the fruit bowl. So that's all balance right there.
It's balance and it's planning, right? I mean, if we know that we have an event on Friday, let's just say, actually, I'll give a real life example. I have book club tonight, and, I know that where we're going, our host is probably going to have chocolate covered strawberries. No pressure on her if she's listening and she didn't have them tonight. It's okay. But, I'm going to consider, maybe I'm not going to have some other kind of treat or dessert or some sweet today, because I know I'm going to have that tonight. And then it's going to make those chocolate covered strawberries even more. So it's planning ahead and knowing kind of what's to come. And yeah, I'm going to eat those chocolate covered strawberries and I'm going to enjoy them, and I'm not going to feel badly about it. I mean, I very rarely have chocolate covered strawberries, so why not enjoy them?
Right. And knowing that you're going somewhere where there may be more snacks and food, what we don't want is like, well, I'll skip dinner because I'm going to eat all the snacks and desserts. Eat your balanced meals, stay hydrated, because a lot of times we're actually thirsty and we're thinking we're hungry. But even if that chocolate covered strawberry or another dessert doesn't actually fit in your normal plan, but it's something that you look forward to, that's great, and in moderation.
Yeah, one of the things that I feel like happens a lot, and this has got to be American culture, is this whole like planning events around the snack table or the food table anyway, right? I mean, we have islands in our kitchen and we put all of the food on the island, and then we just stand around the islands all evening or all day, and we're just picking, and we're picking and we're talking and we're eating, and before you know it, you've eaten goodness knows what, because we just haven't been paying attention. But as hosts and hostesses, we can kind of be creative with that and rearrange things and spread it out a little bit and encourage people to mingle and have conversations rather than it all focused around the food.
So the food is fun, right? And if you look at the traditional Mediterranean dietary pattern, I'm not going to talk about the diet itself, but the base of it is enjoying food and meals with others, right? And socializing, and it brings people together. And part of that is like with this charcuterie board movement, you can still make a balanced meal or snack when you see one of those boards, whether you pick some meat or cheese for some protein, or maybe there's some nuts or seeds. And then a lot of times those boards will have some types of vegetables or fruit. It's all about choices. And for healthy fats on there could be a dip, but there could be some olives. So someone who's trying to be intentional about balancing their meals and snacks can still do well when all the food is on the island. I know for me, if I stand around the island, I definitely eat and drink more. Where if I take my plate and walk away, I typically then I'm talking to people and I don't go back. So it's interesting for our listeners to just observe how you handle that when you are at a party or a social event.
Well, and even going so far as to, plan ahead for those events, but just plan ahead for your day. I mean, you mentioned, people will go to events and they won't eat, because I know I'm going to have extra things at this event. And then you go there and you're starving. I'm running and I'm hurried and I'm harried in the morning and I don't eat breakfast. So then by the time lunch comes, instead of, grabbing something like hard-boiled egg and some carrot sticks out of the refrigerator case at Wawa, I'm going to grab, value meal from one of the fast food places. And someone may be more likely to overindulge because they've been skipping these other meals and not really planning and preparing. And I would say, too, that it sets you up for that kind of like that witching hour. You get home from work and you're about to start preparing dinner, and then all of a sudden you're snacking because you're hungry, but you're preparing dinner. So then you're almost full, right, before dinner, but then you've made dinner, so now you're eating. So I wonder, too, and the science behind this, right, is that part of what happens with all these blood sugar spikes, and then all of a sudden it's 8 o'clock at night and we're hungry again. I can only imagine that this inconsistent eating pattern and, really carb loaded is how we eat a lot of times is impacting that.
Absolutely. And, sometimes people think like, oh, I'll mention, why don't you try a 3 o'clock snack? And they're like, well, no, I get home and dinner's shortly after that. But that 3 o'clock snack will buy you a little time. Not a big snack. It might be an apple and some almonds, or, an apple and string cheese, however you want to balance that, or a small yogurt, whatever. But then when you get home at 5 and now, your kids need something or the phone rings and you haven't started dinner, you're not falling into that trap of eating this, a quantity of food before dinner. That being said, for people who do that, as you start to break that habit, have a veggie tray in the refrigerator, pull it out as you're making dinner. And like for your husband who wants his meat and potatoes for dinner, as you're cooking the meat and potatoes, if he eats all the veggies on the veggie tray, bam, you met that requirement for a balanced meal right then.
If I am cutting cucumbers, carrots, or peppers, it's like there's a silent alarm that goes off in my house, and all of a sudden I have my 2 teenagers are grabbing those vegetables, which I love it. I never tell them don't eat those vegetables, save that for dinner or whatever. I mean, they're just going at it, and I love it. It's great.
Well, it's kind of funny. Like I've observed my own kids over the years. If I put a bowl of chips and salsa out, they demolish the whole bowl of chips and salsa. But if I put out the veggie tray, sometimes with hummus or guacamole, they'll eat the veggie tray. So that's another food philosophy, is really keeping those healthy foods in sight, whether it's the veggie trays or a fruit bowl, because before you go walk to your pantry to look for something, if there's a bowl of oranges, apples, bananas right on the cupboard, you'll probably reach for that.
It takes us back to planning and preparing. It really does. And, from a mental health perspective, and we look at these 5 pillars of wellness, obviously we're talking about food and nutrition today. And for some of you, this conversation might be eliciting a lot of bubbling up stress because you're thinking about everything I have to do and overhauling and making all these changes. And it really is about making small, sustainable changes for real life, long-term solutions. We haven't mentioned it much yet, but I know one of the important things for folks to remember is water, right? Making sure that they're consuming water. The importance of hydration. Gosh, that could be an episode on of its own. But, drinking a cup of water before you make your cup of coffee in the morning, or instead of filling up your glass with sweet tea, fill it up with water first and drink that water. It's not about doing a complete overhaul, but just where can there be some simple swaps, some simple substitutions, I guess, that can help to shore up the foundation when it comes to food and nutrition.
Absolutely. And interestingly, over the years, what I have found with water, and I appreciate that you're drinking your water, is that for a lot of people, some people just don't like water. So you can add, some people like it, room temperature, some people like it ice cold, some people want it out of a straw, some people want to add some flavor, lemon or lime. And that's fine. And nowadays, all the seltzer waters, as long as there's no added sugars, fake sugars, all that. But the bottle you drink out of matters, just like coffee. Certain mornings, you want your certain coffee cup, the feel of it. Some people want a water bottle with a flip lid. Some want with the straw. Some like it out of a cup. Think about what would encourage you to drink more water. And it may mean going to one of your local stores and buying a cup that you enjoy. Some people like to see the ounces of water and know the status of how much they've had. That's fine. You don't have to have that. But if you go buy a bottle, figure out if it's a 16 ounce, 24 ounce, or 32 ounce, and this is an easy one because you can measure water. It's a lot easier to measure water than food all day and all that, or the balance and the calories and the macros. That sounds probably a little overwhelming. And I don't believe we need to do all that to be successful. Water is real easy to know. I either drank this amount of water or I didn't. So I would encourage our listeners, if you don't drink any water throughout the day, start with 1 or 2 cups. That's 8 to 16 ounces. If you're like, yeah, I drink water, but I have no idea how much, well, spend the next day or two kind of seeing what your norm is, and then figure out where you can start adding so that you can increase slowly. What we don't want is someone feeling like they feel like they're water loading and now they're running to the restroom all the time. Like, this can be a gradual thing. I mean, heck, it is the end of January when we're recording this. Blink, right? So almost a month has gone by, and the next month will go by. And picture in 4 weeks where you could be if you just added a little bit each day or each week.
Well, and I would go so far as to encourage our listeners to go to your calendar today while you're listening to this episode, whether it's a digital calendar or a paper calendar or a notes app on your phone, and make a note of how you feel. Just generally, how do you feel? And if your choice is to add 8 to 16 ounces of water to your day, then put a little reminder in your phone in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks to reassess. Because if you're living constantly dehydrated, and if you're not drinking water and you're drinking other liquids, you're dehydrated because your body needs water. It doesn't need fluid, it needs water. I would guarantee that within days, but certainly if you keep up that habit, within a couple of weeks, you're going to get that reminder on your phone and you're going to say, you know what? I do feel a little better. Maybe a little bit more clear-headed, maybe not so sluggish, maybe my skin's a little brighter. Who knows? And once we start to feel better in one area, we're more likely to engage in other things. We're more likely to maybe go for a walk or maybe have a conversation with a friend and, explore some relationships. And it all builds off of each other. And what you said about having the right cup is so true. This water bottle that I'm drinking out of, I tend to grab it because it closes, right? And it pops and I can just toss it in my bag. The problem is, when I'm with clients, I don't want to do this and drink because I feel like it obstructs my face and I'd prefer to have a straw. I know that I drink more water when I have a straw. I know that. But it matters. The whole point of that is it matters.
And I know for some of my folks, and it happens to me too, because if I'm talking to clients and I'm not drinking my water, then at the end of the day, I'm like, oh no. Then I say, well, I'm going to drink it on my way home. And sometimes I may even sit in my driveway until that water is gone. So just having a plan.
Here we are back to that 4-letter word, plan. It's so important. So let's see. We talked about the healthy plate and balancing the plate. We talked about water and hydration. We talked about kind of planning and preparing. What are some final tips that you might share with somebody just to give them the basics?
I would say, use the shortcuts that are out there. Like when I go into any grocery store, they have pre-cut vegetables. I mean, even pre-cut fruit, because let's face it, nobody loves cutting pineapples or mangoes or those things. You might pay a little more, but if it gets you to eat it and you enjoy it, then you can shift to buying the whole food and prepare it yourself if you'd like to save a little money. If you struggle with things like, I hear people say like, oh, I don't like touching raw poultry or things like that. Well, you can either buy it frozen pre-cooked or buy the rotisserie chicken. Like think about what shortcuts would benefit you. And if you go, yeah, I could do that, well, do that. Like just start with something like that, something small like that. Part of that as well is going to, I need to say, is going to be removing some of those things that are sabotaging you from piecing together the eggs, the fruits, and the vegetables. And this doesn't have to happen overnight, but perhaps have a plan for yourself or your family to look through your pantry, your freezer, the condiment drawer, and be like, okay, so what do we have here? You may choose to just get rid of it, or you may say, you know what, we'll finish this peanut butter, and then this one has a lot of ingredients in it. When we replace it, we're going to buy one that just has peanuts or peanuts and salt, but not all the extra oils and additives. Or you could say the same for ketchup or barbecue sauce, and just start being aware, especially of your daily things that you use, and start upgrading those.
I have a friend who works from home on Fridays, and so she orders her groceries Thursday night, she goes and picks them up Friday morning, she's ready for the weekend. That doesn't work for me because I work out of the office on Fridays, and we typically have a sporting event Thursday night, so I don't have time to do that, right? So, what works for me is something a little bit different. I kind of gather my thoughts for meal planning Friday, Saturday, make my grocery list, and then Sunday on the way home from church, conveniently enough, I have to drive past the grocery store. I stop, I get my groceries, I head home, take care of what I need to do. Finding the routine that works for you. Because what works for me is not going to work for everyone else. What works for someone else may not work for me. So finding those routines and those habits that work for you. And as you begin to notice that you feel better, then people are more likely to continue a habit. If you're like, oh, I didn't really pay attention if I feel any better after I drink all this water. Well, maybe I must not feel any better. I'm not going to drink all this water. Pay attention to it because you're going to feel better after you're actually hydrating your body.
Absolutely. And one final thought is that, we keep talking about meal planning or prep. It can be ingredient prep. Like you might say, I don't want to plan all my meals, but maybe on the weekend you make a pot of rice or you roast some vegetables, not knowing how you're going to plug them in later. And that's fine too. Some people find that is less stressful than having to spend all day Sunday cooking.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again, Tracy. As always, it's a pleasure chatting with you. For our listeners, make sure you head over to our website, hopehealingtherapy.com. There is a whole nutrition website that's built out there. It's got some recipes. It's got Tracy's blogs. There's going to be links to, or there is links to her different podcasts that she's offered. So if you're like, yeah, I'd love to get some more ideas or some different ideas, there's some recipes there, lots of good stuff, simple, healthy ideas that we just want to help give to you so that you can shore up that foundation of that pillar for food and nutrition. As always, we would love to hear from you. Feel free to email me, jennifer@hopehealingtherapy.com. You can also send us a DM on our socials. Thanks for listening and have a great day.